They're unstoppable! But we're gonna stop them anyway! Send in the Marines! We're the Space Marines! Drake, Ripley, 8-Bone, Bishop, and I'm Hicks.
Looks like love at first sight to me.
You're absolutely right, Hicks. It was love at first sight for me when I first laid my eyes on the Kenner Aliens toy line in the early 90s. And ever since I picked up my first figure in this line, the Queen Alien figure, I've been collecting ever since, up until this day. And I've carried that on through, for me, keeping this line alive by doing customs. I really enjoy doing those. I see no end in sight. There's so many different potential custom figures I can make from the movies, from the comics. So this line, to me, still lives on to this day, and it will continue to live on in my collection. It's something that I won't ever part with. And what I do love about this line particularly is, like, it's very collectible, right? It's not a super expensive line to get into, though there are some harder to find, higher ticket items. You have your color variations of the Space Marines, your Vasquez, Hudson, and O'Malley. You have the color variations of the Xenomorphs, some of the KB exclusives, of course the Queen Hive playset, and to some degree, the Aliens Hive Wars line has become more and more collectible over the years. So given that this toy line means so much to me, I was extremely lucky to acquire some internal documentation from a former Kenner employee that discusses the viability of bringing this line to market. These came into my possession a few years ago, and basically what I have are 3 sets of documents and a set of pictures. And what I thought I would do today was talk about the pictures themselves that kind of show the prototypes or test shots for this line. It was probably things that they showed upper management to say, hey, this is kind of what we have for an idea for this line. What's really cool about these pictures, none of this stuff as it is in the pictures made it to market. Some of it did in a different sort of form or different variation, and then some of this stuff unfortunately never made it to market. As far as the documents are concerned, there's 3 sets of documents I have here. The first is basically the market research data, and these documents go into how they test this Aliens line against other toy lines on the market. So at this point in time, they tested it against Batman toys, Ghostbusters, G.I. Joe, and to pull back the curtain a little bit, the Aliens line tested really well, and there's some very interesting things within this document. They devised sort of this token system where they would show the group of kids some videos sort of hyping up the different toy lines, and they would give them tokens and then let them go choose toys that they gravitated towards. And the Aliens line tested really strong, which is why eventually it came to market. One of the other sets of documents is basically a line summary and almost sort of their go-to-market strategy and the various stages different parts of this line are in, and what their next moves are and what they need to do to cut cost. And it's really fascinating to see how close some of these things that weren't released actually were being planned on being released. And so a really fascinating look. And again, I'll probably save that for another video, doing a bit deeper dive into what all that discusses. And the last set of documents is basically the rough outline or script for the TV spot or commercial. And again, very fascinating because some of this stuff that was planned didn't make it to market, but I do think that a lot of the bones and structure of what they put together eventually made it to the TV spot. And one quick thing before I get into the pictures, sprinkled throughout all this documentation is a really fascinating look at Operation Aliens, the proposed cartoon by Kenner to Fox. And I believe that Kenner's line of thinking was, upon their initial sort of market research data and test, what they found was only 30% of the kids that were tested in this market research data had actually seen Aliens. Makes sense, it's an R-rated film. I mean, I know I had seen it by that point in time, but then again, I can't speak for everyone. And so I really think that Kenner thought, hey, RoboCop had success with an animated series, Rambo to a certain degree, and those are R-rated movies, so maybe to bring more awareness and popularity to help sell this line, why don't we pitch the idea of an animated series to Fox and see if they would back it? And as most of us know, there were some animation cells put together I think solely for the idea of advertisement, and then it hopes that Fox would carry this on through. But it just didn't happen. And that's a real shame because I think that would have been awesome.
Alien invasion problem? Send in the Marines!
Send in the Marines!
Space Marines! Aliens!
So the first picture we're going to look at here that came with these documents is what Kenner was calling their role-playing set. And so this is essentially life-size weapons and tech from the film. And so what we have here is the helmet and assault gun and the smart gun. Listen, for one-shots or test shots or prototypes, these look really rad, especially the smart gun. And I get what Kenner was thinking, right? Even though they had acquired Nerf by this point, you know, things like Super Soaker and obviously the Nerf guns as well were super popular. So why not sort of loop in this awesome design and awesome tech from the movie into life-size sort of role-playing action items? And taking a look at the things themselves, the helmet is, you know, fairly well done. It looks like they just got sort of a standard military helmet and slapped a little communications walkie-talkie on the side with a microphone, the infrared scope, and what looks to be maybe the POV camera on the side. I love the detail on the side right there that says Bug Hunt. So it'd been really curious to see if they were to include extra decals so you could customize it, but really, really neat. And what's interesting is that within the sort of rough draft of the commercial, it does talk about how they were going to show this off. And it, you know, talks about, hey, you're surrounded by aliens and you drop the infrared scope to get higher visibility. And so they were really close to bringing this to market. And I think part of the reason that maybe they didn't is all three of these items, or two, because I do think the helmet and assault gun were going to be bundled together. I think the price point was probably just going to be a bit too high. I mean, these were pushing $20. I think the smart gun was, you know, $19.99 or $16, and the helmet and assault gun was going to be like $20. So in the early 90s, kind of expensive, especially, you know, for within this toy line. And maybe they felt it was going to draw too much attention away from the meat potatoes of this line, the action figures and potential play sets. And so the only thing that I am aware of and know that ever made it to market that is anywhere close to this is there's a company from Argentina called Hoxa. And they sort of get the blessing and liberties from Kenner to repackage some of their stuff under their brand. And they did release this blaster gun, this laser targeting game that kind of straps onto your wrist. It's quirky and silly. I was able to pick one up a few years ago. It kind of reminds me of that assault gun. I do think that this is just a very generic sort of laser targeting game that they just slapped an Aliens package on and said, hey, let's throw this out here. It was never released in the States. It was only released in Argentina. But that's really the only thing that I can think of that comes close to any of this stuff. But very fascinating, very cool. And it's a shame that at least maybe the smart gun, you know, wasn't released. I think that would have been pretty sick. This next picture is really kick-ass. So what we have here are the test shots of the human space marines and the xenomorphs. And so looking at the human characters first, I think a lot of these are reworked G.I. Joes, kind of kit bashed, maybe some sculpted weapons to try to, you know, show off what they had in mind. You know, we have Ripley here. We can see her at the very top. She's got her flamethrower. The color ended up being very different, more vibrant with that sort of mauve purple shirt. The figure we see in the test shot here looks more like the colorway we see in the film. Just to the left of her, I think this is supposed to be their bishop figure, is what I think. And this definitely looks like a G.I. Joe of some sorts. Viewers, you know, if you have an idea of what figures these may be that they used for these test shots, please let me know. You know, my eye's not picking up on anything that I can see that stands out. Just below Bishop, I think this is supposed to be their Drake. You can see the smart gun that they put together, probably kit bash from another figure. Really cool. Below him is Hicks. I think obviously, you know, he's got the communication headset on and a much bigger, sort of beefier weapon of some sort, very akin to the smart gun, but still really neat. And then just to the right of him is Hudson. And throughout the documentation, the idea was that Hudson was going to be included in the first wave, in the first series, with a grenade launching arm. This actually turned out to be a pwn. They sort of pivoted and shifted gears, and Hudson came out later on. But given that this little figure here is in the grenade throwing action, I think this was their idea of the Hudson. And it looks like they have some sort of makeshift motorcycle helmet on the figure, but still really cool. And, you know, kind of going back to the Hicks, you know, I did a custom figure of sort of a Hicks, how we see him through a majority of the film, with the helmet off and just the communication headset on. And it kind of looks like that Kenner had that idea initially. And so it's interesting to see that they, again, pivoted and decided to add the helmet on there. And I'm glad that they did, because it definitely gives you a very solid Colonial Marine look, but very, very fascinating. So let's move over to the Xenomorphs, and there's a lot of fascinating stuff here. First and foremost, if you look at the sculpt of these figures, I believe, I have no way to verify this, but I think these are leftover molds from the intended Alien toy line from the first film. Kenner had plans to release a 3 3/4 scale figure from the first film, or line of figures rather. And these look very similar to what Super 7 went on to do years later and bringing that line back to life. And I almost feel like those were used for the base of these figures. I could be wrong, but it does appear that way. Maybe they were all originally sculpted. But taking a look at all the different ones here, you start to see the color variations and even the ideas of sort of their action features. You know, the gold one has the acid spitting action, kind of like the gorilla alien. You have one that has this noose on its tail. I think that's how they refer to it in some of the documentation. You know, a way to grab the Colonial Marines and take them back to the hive. Some really cool stuff. And I'm glad that they didn't keep it so simple. I think I've talked about this here on my channel. I love that they pivoted and said, hey, let's make this more toyetic. Let's do this hybrid sort of animal xenomorph approach. I think that makes it a lot more interesting. And of course, lastly, the big gal here, the queen, you can definitely see where they were going. I mean, the large one definitely is intended to be the queen here, and obviously much different than what we eventually got, but still you can kind of see how they're working through it and just showing off their ideas for this line and telling them, hey, this is kind of what we have in mind. You know, Colonial Marines with different weapon loadouts, different action sets, xenomorphs that have different playability features with some acid squirting action and some grabbing action, and a much more taller, prominent queen alien. But super fascinating. I highly doubt any of these still exist. I'm sure they were all destroyed or reworked for something else, but how cool would it be to actually have this set of figures in your toy line? However, I've even thought about trying to recreate these test shots as customs. That would be one hell of a project. It would really take some research and digging to try to nail down what they used for these. But I do think it's, at the end of the day, regardless of if that comes to fruition, this is still fascinating. I mean, this is history. This is toy history. And for a line that I love so much, and this is the humble beginnings of the real core of this toy line, the Space Marines and the Xenomorphs. Oh boy, these next two pictures just really break my heart, because there's a lot of stuff in here that did not make production to the final line. So in this picture, we have a couple of proposed play sets. So let's look at the one on the bottom left first. There's no doubt in my mind that this is a reworked Swamp Thing play set, the Transducer play set. And, you know, you could tell that they added some of the hive sort of detail in there to make it look more like it came from the Aliens film. They were calling this the Alien Laboratory. It's interesting because their idea for this was, and it talks about this in the documentation, was that you put a Space Marine or a Colonial Marine on the play set, you flip it, and it turns into a xenomorph. So that's actually pretty cool. And I do think it's an interesting way to sort of show off the transformation of, humans to aliens, right? It's obviously nowhere near what they did in the film or how it works in the lore of Aliens, but an interesting idea to bring something fun and toyetic to a play set. But the next one is absolutely fascinating. And this was the Marine headquarters. And so several years ago, before I even found this documentation, I did a video talking about the Aliens playset that we should have got. And I found this military playset at Walmart. It was super cheap, but what I loved about it is it scaled with the figures. It had a very, obviously, Colonial Marines look since it was a military playset. It's two-tiered, and there's a lot of really cool stuff you can do. It looks great when you're taking pictures. And so it's interesting to see that Kenner kind of had that same thought in their mind. And I don't know if this is a reuse play set or if it was put together specifically for this. I can't pinpoint it to being anything else that Kenner released. I could be wrong, but there's a good chance it was probably, again, kit bashed from several different parts of things and put together. So what we see in here is a very rough outline of probably what eventually would have come to market. You see the sort of the hive and the xenomorph detail where they started to form the hive in some various computers and communication ports, and it looks like a big weapon down on the lower floor. You have an elevator, you have some sort of sliding doors in there. Limited playability, but again, it's just to sort of give it a test shot. This is what we kind of have in mind. And I do believe the Space Marine on the second floor there is their Hicks figure that they're kind of displaying to say, hey, this is size and scale we're looking at, but really cool. And, it's just a shame that the only playset that was released for this line was the Queen Hive playset. Very cool. One of the best playsets that, in my opinion, it's ever been released. Great detail. The sculpt on the Queen is amazing. But how cool would it have been to get an LV-426 or what they're calling it here, the Marine headquarters playset? I just think it would have been awesome, and it would have been really curious to see how far they would have expanded it, what other action or playability features they would have added to it. Absolutely fascinating. This picture breaks my heart even more than the previous one because these are all the proposed vehicles for this line. And, most of this stuff didn't make it to market, but let's just fight through the heartache and get through it. First and foremost, front and center, we have the power loader. And of all the things pictured in all these pictures I have, I think this one is closest to what eventually came to market. And they talk about that in the documentation on how this was really going to be a centerpiece of the line. And I get it. It's iconic. It's like iconic design, iconic scenes from Aliens where Ripley fights the Queen Xenomorph. And so, it's the closest I think that we eventually got from anything pictured. What's interesting is inside the power loader, you can kind of barely see him, but that's a low light figure from G.I. Joe. No doubt about it. And so now thinking about it, there's a couple things that come to mind. I think there's a good chance that all those Space Marines were probably reworked G.I. Joes. And what's really fascinating is I'm sure many kids did, I'm not singular in this, but prior to this line being released, I used my G.I. Joes as my Colonial Marines. We didn't have an Aliens toy line, right? So my G.I. Joes were reworked to become Colonial Marines. So it's just interesting to see Kenner kind of using that as an example of the size and scale of the vehicles and kind of the proposed figures. But I digress. If we go just to the right of that, we see what they're calling their mini dropship. Now, this is something that, again, was close to coming to market. We saw the mini dropship advertised on the back of the figure cards in some of the Kenner catalogs, but it was never actually released for the Aliens toy lines. It was later released and kind of reworked for the VR Troopers line by Kenner. But this is obviously a slightly different design. I like what was eventually released with the wings that fold out. I think it's more reminiscent of a mini dropship, but this is sort of their idea of what their mini dropship would look like. So we move back over to the left of the power loader. This is what they're calling their scout vehicle. And we did get a variation of this released as the hover vehicle, the hover tread vehicle. And probably my least favorite vehicle released from the Kenner Aliens toy line. It just is very generic military. There's nothing about it that screams aliens by any stretch of the imagination, but matter of fact, I think I kind of like this design a bit better, but nonetheless, that's what it came to be, is the hover tread vehicle. So let's jump to the top of this picture, and this is really where the heartache sets in. We have the APC and the Cheyenne dropship. Neither of these were released, but you could see the time and attention to detail that they put together to sort of test shot these. And, these vehicles are massive. I think the price points were going to be around $24, $25 and, $30, maybe close to that. So kind of expensive for early 90s, right? Maybe that's the reason why they weren't released, but it's a real shame. Speaking of just the dropship specifically, they did advertise this in a Toy Fair catalog in the early 90s. And so I do think that this one kind of got pushed further into production, reworked, and unfortunately, it just never saw the light of day. But as you can see, it was going to be massive, and it had to be, right? Not as big, or not big enough to fit the APC in there. I mean, that thing would have to be gigantic. How cool would that be? Because, in the film, the APC sort of comes out of the dropship, but neither of these vehicles were released. The closest that we got even to the APC was the Stinger vehicle, and that's not even really close. It's, a one-seater vehicle with a sort of a turret gun in the back, and it's got like a grappling hook. And so I think it was a cost-saving thing. I think it was like, hey, if we're going to take this to market at this price point, maybe we could scale it back and make something that's a bit more affordable that may sell a bit better. But, these test shots, these sort of prototypes are absolutely fascinating. I kind of feel like they were maybe built from the ground up, maybe from existing model kits that were out there and kind of reworked. I don't really know, but it's just a shame that we never got either of those, because I do think that they just would have been incredible, obviously. But it's neat nonetheless to have documentation of what they were going to do and what they were proposing. Again, toy history for a line that means so very much to me. So those are the 4 pictures included with this documentation. And like I said, I'll circle back and dive a bit deeper into the other pieces within this set that I got from a former Kenner employee. But fascinating, right? And it's incredible to look and see what could have been. And for me, like I'd mentioned before, and for many of you know that have subscribed to my channel for a while, this toy line lives on with me. I mean, for example, Hiya Toys did their Armored Personnel Carrier, their APC. Doesn't scale exactly with the Kenner figures, but it's close enough. And, it's something that I can add to this line to keep it alive. Like I mentioned before, the military playset that I've used time and time again to display my figures and to take pictures of them and stuff like that. Very reminiscent of the proposed Space Marine headquarters. But, I was so excited to share this. I didn't know how I wanted to approach it, but I thought I would start with probably the most fascinating thing from this set of documentation, and that's the pictures. I would love to know, what you guys think of some of this stuff. And if there's anything else you would like to see me specifically cover within these documents, take a deeper dive, let me know. Also, did your eagle eye pinpoint anything in these pictures that was reworked from a different toy line that I missed? Man, drop me a line. I love the conversations with my viewers. If this is your first time checking out 2-Day Rentals, thank you so very much. And if you've been stopping down on my channel for a while, thank you so very much too. I ask that maybe you share this with a friend, someone else that you think may be interested in this stuff. That would go a long way, and I would really appreciate it. It's the 40th anniversary of Aliens, so I've got a couple of other little things planned that I want to put out in the month of July of 2026, and so look forward to that. And of course, it's like I say at the end of all my videos, let's be kind as we rewind and fast forward through time. Thank you so much for stopping by 2-Day Rentals.